This is my daughter, Nora. She's a grade 11 student at Calvin High School.
This is my dad, Dan Lett, and he's a columnist for the Winnipeg Free Press. We were asked to do a presentation on the broad topic of the good life. For me and my family, the good life is really about being well informed. We all need to know what's going on in our home communities, our countries, and around the world so we can vote, volunteer, fundraise, and generally help others live a good life. But getting good information can be tough.
Yeah, it can be really tough, Nora. Do you remember these guys?
Yes, those are the killer clowns, and for about 5 minutes when I was 11, I thought they were real. In my defense, I was pretty young, and a lot of my friends were convinced that killer clowns were in Winnipeg.
Well, really, further in your defense, there were a lot of people all over Canada and the United States that thought killer clowns were real, largely because there were a lot of news stories documenting what appeared to be real incidents involving homicidal clowns.
It didn't take long for articles to come out that debunked the first stories, and they made it pretty clear that this was a hoax and that the original stories were fake. But for a lot of people, the damage was already done. Many people believed there were bands of killer clowns terrorizing communities and trying to lure children into the woods.
Yeah, a lot of people did buy into the hoax, Nora. This poll was taken by a very reputable polling company. It was published online at Vox, which is also a very reputable online source of news. As you can see, at the height of the killer clown hoax, Americans were actually more afraid of clowns than terrorism or economic collapse. Even more interesting, 2 out of 3 Americans said they wanted police or government to step in to stop the clowns.
You're probably wondering, why are we telling you about killer clowns? Our presentation isn't really about killer clowns, it's about fake news.
So what do we mean by fake news? Fake news is so much more than hoax stories. It's the term we use to describe content that is deliberately false or misleading. It's a huge problem. It's hard to say how much of the news online is fake, but surveys show that the gross majority of people who get most of their news online believe most of it is fake or misleading.
And it spreads faster. A 2018 study from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology showed that fake stories spread 75% faster on Twitter. What that means is that even long-standing professional news organizations find themselves drawn into the dissemination of dishonest or deliberately false news.
Making the problem even worse, the economics of news gathering right now is very tight. And it means that very few organizations have enough people to check every story to see if it's fake before they publish it. Now, the result is that good journalists become unwittingly involved in regurgitating fake news because they don't have the time to do original work.
So, how can the average person guard against fake news when there's so much out there?
Well, this brings us to media literacy for dummies. And before you get upset, by dummies, I mean everybody. We are all vulnerable to fake news.
What do we mean by media literacy? Well, there are endless sources of mostly online information and news, from well-established news organizations to digital-only sources, like social media and websites like BuzzFeed. Also, some sites pretending to be news organizations. Increasing incidents where third parties are found to be deliberately fabricating news, and uninformed consumers that spend tons of time online, but not a lot of time actually reading news.
Still, you might be wondering, why do I even need to be well informed? This is where we come to the thing 1 and thing 2 theory of media literacy. Thing 1, it's your duty as a citizen to stay informed about what's going on in the world so you can make good decisions. Thing 2, there are a lot of mischievous people spreading false news to harm you or other people while enriching themselves. And they rely completely on the fact that you are not taking care of thing 1.
Let's take a look at the anatomy of a fake news story. And it's important to remember that fake news isn't always obvious like the killer clown story. Sometimes it's just a really small lie that grows to be a big one online. Step 1, plant a fake news story with a friendly news organization. You may remember that in 2017, a lawyer named Robert Mueller did a big investigation into allegations that former US President Donald Trump got help by the Russian government to win the 2016 election. Mueller's 2019 report found that Trump's campaign worked closely with Russian operatives to discredit Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. However, ever since that report came out, Republicans have been trying to discredit it any way they can.
This story quotes Republican lawmakers who claim that members of Robert Mueller's team tried to hide incriminating text and emails that revealed a Get Trump conspiracy by wiping their phones illegally. Now, what's important is that this story appeared on the Fox News website. Now, you might remember that Fox News is former President Trump's favorite news channel.
What is our first clue that this story is fake? Well, in the middle of the story, Fox News says the documents alleging the illegal phone wiping were dug up by a group named Judicial Watch and first reported by an online news source called The Federalist. Now, you might ask, who are Judicial Watch and The Federalist?
When we need to know who's behind a certain news story or who's involved in a certain news organization, I tend to go to a website called MediaBiasFactCheck.com. This is a nonpartisan, independent website that does fact-checking on stories and also provides profiles of media organizations to identify their bias. As we can see, Judicial Watch is ranked by Media Bias Fact Check as a questionable source with an extreme right-wing bias, and they're marked very low on factual accuracy. The Federalist is also extremely right-wing. It has a mixed record on factual reporting, but a very heavy right bias. What this is telling us is that these two organizations are not credible sources of information. But there's more to creating a fake news story than just quoting from questionable sources.
Yeah, every fake news story needs a heaping dose of political spin. In this story, which appeared in Politico, a Republican senator says that he wrote a letter to the Inspector General's office and the U.S. Department of Justice to raise concerns about the original allegations. No proof or evidence is added, just lots of political rhetoric. And then you add more spin. Here we have more Republicans demanding an investigation into the phone wiping scandal. Yeah, it's a scandal now. And finally, you get the president to talk about it. Now even legitimate news organizations are forced to report what is being said. This is how real news organizations get drawn into reporting mostly fake stories. But strip away all of the allegations, the innuendo and rhetoric, and what do you really have?
No one in any of these stories explains why wiping the phones is a problem, and nobody ever points out that even when a phone is wiped, all of the data is stored on cloud servers. And not once did anybody specifically describe the information on the phones and how it could prove President Trump's allegation that the Mueller inquiry was a witch hunt. So what lessons can we learn from this kind of fake news? First, we need to read more news and we need to ask more questions about who is behind the news we're reading. Second, social media is not a substitute for news coming from real news organizations. Social media is actually fuel for fake news. And last, do not read news from only one source.
We mentioned Media Bias/Fact Check before. It's a good resource that has background on a lot of Canadian news organizations. You can also get great information on how the news media works from PolitiFact, which is part of the Poynter Institute, a great source of public interest journalism. And then there's All Sides, another nonpartisan, not-for-profit foundation that provides background on media organizations.
All Sides is very interesting because it not only profiles individual news organizations, but it does fact checks on individual stories, not just in one news organization, but across all the news organizations that are reporting it. Information like this won't help you figure out exactly which stories are true and which ones are fake, but it'll help you raise some red flags when you read a story that seems a little bit off. Even if you don't use these resources, ask lots of questions. Who is reporting the news? Who do they work for? Who owns that news outlet? And what are other news organizations saying about the same story? That will help you sort the fake from the real news.
That's our presentation. Remember, living a good life means helping others. And the only way we know how to help others is by learning all we can about what's going on around us. And to do that, we need to get past fake news and find the truth. Thank you.
Thank you.